Hope in your heart will see you through. It's a new world, so go out and find it. I can tell you things that will break your heart. Don't stay in the shadows, making you start. I can tell you things that will break your heart. Don't stay in the shadows, making you start. Something in the sky will make you cry, but you won't fall down. Take a little love from the clouds above, spread it all around. Look to the sunrise, feel its warmth. You still got a future, so ride the storm. It's a new world, so go out and find it. Look at your life and all you give. We all stand beside you so you can live in your new world. So go out and live it.
Okay, so thank you for joining us, everyone. We will begin at exactly 5 past, so we've got 1 minute because more people may join us yet. What we've just been listening to is Brave New World, a song written by and performed by 2 men living with dementia. And what I've done is I've dropped into the chat the link to that song if you would like to go back and listen to it at some point. Good morning. And thank you so much for joining us. So this is the second of Ideal's webinars, and we now have one pretty much every month until I think April. So do have a look on our website for the full schedule. Now, who are we, in case you haven't met us? We are from Ideal, and we are a large research study based at the University of Exeter, but we have researchers and participants based all over the UK. And I'm speaking to you today from an incredibly wet Aberystwyth. So we've been working since 2014 with a large group of people with mild to moderate dementia and also carers, all of whom live in the community, to try and understand which things make a difference to feeling like you're living a good quality of life with dementia, which things make it easier, and importantly, which things make it harder. And all of this work is with the ultimate aim of improving the lives of people with dementia and carers. Okay, so you can see a picture of some of us there. We've got researchers, experts by experience pictured there. And we started in 2014 with over 1,500 people with dementia and over 1,200 carers. So it's a large study. And we're incredibly grateful to be funded by Alzheimer's Society as a centre of excellence. Now, we're also the people behind the Living with Dementia Toolkit. And if you haven't already visited us, I highly recommend that you come in and have a visit of the Living with Dementia Toolkit.org.uk. You will find plenty of exciting things in there. Okay, so what are we up to? Well, we're going to start off in a moment by having a look at a video interview with director Paul Jepson. And then we're going to hear a live discussion from Claire Pentecost, who is both the Ideal programme manager, but was also the producer on the play and the film. And Julia Burton, who is one of our wonderful experts by experience, who is a part of our Always involvement group. And Always stands for Action on Living Well, Asking You. And they've been working with us since the start of Ideal. And then we're going to come over to you for Q&A. So there will be a chance to ask your questions. You can either type them or ask them live. It is entirely up to you. So Claire, if you would like to talk us through this next slide.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So for anybody that's not seen the film, I imagine there might be a few of you who have, but for anybody who hasn't yet, I thought it might be just good to have some images that sort of you can hold in your mind as you're listening, so you can sort of have an idea about what we're talking about. So the image on the top left-hand side is a piece of art by Willie Gilder, who was a man with dementia, and he produced this this artwork for us to help us promote the play and also to sort of communicate the idea of it being a bit turned upside down and communication is difficult, and his imagery helped us sort of portray the idea of the film. And then 3 other images are taken from there were 2 on the right are taken from the performances. We had 3 live performances. And we filmed those, and the other thing that we also have within the film are some clips of us chatting. So on the top bottom left-hand corner is some members of the Always group. So they're the dementia advisory group that Kathy was already mentioned, and they, the people with dementia were really important throughout the whole process. So that's something important to say. So just as a general background, the whole point of what we were trying to do was to try and understand how to gain the perspectives of people with dementia, and that's sort of where it came from in terms of the study. And this particular piece of work was about sort of solutions to communication challenges. So that was the general, very, very general remit that we had when we were thinking about putting it together. And so this webinar is, as Kathy has said, is a chat with myself and Paul Jepson. And that's pre-recorded, and we had a little chat last week, and he was really sad not to be able to make it today, but that was the solution because he was pulled away on another thing. And obviously Julia, who's here as well. So we'll crack on and get the video started with Paul.
I'm Paul Jepson, and I was the director of The World Turned Upside Down.
Okay, and what was your background, Paul? So obviously you're a director. What was your background, and how did you get involved?
I've been directing for coming up for 30 years, and that's included periods running organisations. And one of the organisations that I ran was the Northcott in Exeter. And while I was there, I put out an open invitation to academics, particularly non-humanities academics, to come forward and contact the theatre if there was a subject that they thought it would be interesting to look at dramatically. And Dr Claire, who is a professor of psychology at the university and obviously runs the Ideal project, came forward and said, I think that I have some material that we could look at, and I think it might be quite interesting to imagine exploring that material theatrically. And what she was talking about was the redacted interviews that she and her colleagues had taken with people who were in the process of living with dementia, and that was the starting point for the idea for the project.
Okay, so you had a little bit of exposure to some people's sort of stories and obviously real life examples, and that gave you some ideas.
That's right. We spent Linda and I and 3 actors spent a week or so looking at sections of these interviews and reading them and thinking about them. And as a result of that, we kind of went away, and the idea was to think about how we might structure a theatre project on that subject. And the idea that we came up with was what turned into The World Turned Upside Down.
And we started talking about this quite a long time ago. So I think it was in 2020 originally. Looking at my notes, in April 2020 we first met. And one of the first things that you wanted to do, you thought was really important, was to get together a group of people that could sort of steer what we were doing and could contribute some ideas. So sort of in those early days, what were you thinking that you wanted to achieve?
I guess what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at turning points in the relationship between carers and people with the condition, because I felt that was something that would be of value not only to people who were directly living with dementia, but other people. In other words, it might have slightly wider currency. And I talked a bit about care and caring with Linda, and both of us felt that it was an important subject, and a subject that people didn't think about it very carefully. and that actually, in some ways, people were sometimes not deliberately, but kind of thoughtlessly a bit disrespectful to care and caring, and that it would be quite interesting to have a look at that.
When we sort of probed and when we started to play around with the rehearsals and the scenarios, it was quite interesting exploring assumptions, wasn't it, and what we thought people might be thinking, and how people might respond, and sort of playing around with it. So, can you say a little bit more about the idea of bringing in the forum theatre aspect?
Forum theatres was developed in a really highly politicised context by Augusto Boal in a South American context, and it was to do with various different political interventions, interventions about unfairnesses, and those unfairnesses were either economic or they were about gender. And the result of his work is a set of attitudes to using improvisation, and those improvisations are used in a particular way. They're used to examine turning points or tipping points in relationships or situations, and also the process around the making of the piece of work is more democratic than usual. In other words, the audience, as opposed to being a passive recipient, is actually actively engaged in the making process. They're asked to nominate different outcomes and to, in some cases, actually even take part in the scenes. And that seemed to me to be a useful set of attitudes to employ around caring for people who are living with dementia. I wouldn't say that we did it in any kind of a very specific or orthodox way. It was more that we were inspired by an attitude to improvisation, to create our own improvisations and patterns around those improvisations, so that we would be able to look at decision points, really, and in particular to explore different outcomes around tipping points in the care-carer relationship, which is what we did. So
that leads me on to the next question, really. I was personally very interested in watching you, as you know, the processes unfolded during rehearsals. Can you sort of just say a little bit more about how you worked with the actors and what we actually did?
Sure. We came up with a set of scenes or scenarios, little mini scenes, and that was a kit. And I wrote those before we started rehearsals, and they were based on research that I'd done within the Always group, particularly of people who had either dementia themselves or had experience of people with dementia. So we identified together a set of interesting situations, and each of those situations had a tipping point. Then we began by providing the actors with some material to start to build characters that could happen within those scenarios, because the scenarios were just patterns of action. They had very basic relationships, but not that much more. So what we did is we went back to the recorded interviews, the transcripts, redacted transcripts, which formed the material for the ideal project, and we used those to develop an understanding of character. And then I rehearsed with the actors, and of course the characters that they developed had as much to do with them as to do with the research, and that's perfectly good. So that's part of the process. And the second part of the process was to do with refining where the areas of maximum interest were. And actually, as the ideas coalesced, they coalesced around the relationship between the cared for and the caregiver. And that is most complex when it's to do with relatives. So in fact, what happened is that all of the scenes that weren't to do with relatives dropped off. And then we further refined the scenes or scenarios, rather, that we liked into a kit. And that's pretty much where we were by the time we went to start doing the performances.
I sort of sat in, and I was there on hand to sort of help out with any ideas about dementia and that side of things, and also to bring in the Always group. But I was fascinated to see how, you made the actors repeat and go over things many, many times, and there were little nuances that came out of their acting as they did that, which we then picked up on, the things that we liked or thought really worked. And our intention was to try to get ideas about the types of things that could go in different directions, because we wanted to prepare that for the audiences, didn't we? So we had quite a lot of scenes in the end, and we had to select some. Could you say a bit more about how we selected the particular scenarios that we took through to the actual play?
Yeah, I think that the ones that we selected, we probably selected on there were two values to them. One was the dramatic value. So where are the stakes highest, and the other was to do with the thematic value. Where is it on message about communication between people who have the condition and people who look after people who have the condition? And those two things were the ones that caused us to sort of zero in. And then I think the last bit was some sense of progression as well. That there wanted to be a sense of the first point of finding out that you have the condition right the way through to having the condition in quite an advanced stage. But equally, it was important to me that the process that we presented wasn't linear, because I think a lot of drama on the subject is very straightforwardly linear, and actually people with dementia don't think in those terms. They think in rather different terms about their condition.
The idea of having narratives that people could follow was important, but the idea of going backwards and forwards was quite interesting, wasn't it? And actually, when we did when we put the film together, it wasn't always linear how that was shown either. Sometimes we went back to the rehearsals, and then we went forward back into the play. We tried to stitch it together so that people could follow it and could follow some sort of story, but that was quite interesting. So I was just thinking, when you were talking about that process and what you did, have you done something like this before? Well, I guess I'm thinking about what's different about what you did here.
I'm quite a keen improviser, even if I'm rehearsing something which is script based. I improvise quite a lot, so it's in that respect, it's not something that's new. I think that I hadn't rehearsed different outcomes to the same scene quite so much detail before. So I think that's definitely new. The chopping into time is something that I quite often do. So I'd say the thing that was most different for me was multiple outcomes from the same scene, because that's quite fun, because then you work out what you have to change to make the different outcome happen, and it's often not very much actually.
Could you give an example of a little thing that you might change to have a different outcome?
Well, I think that in some of the most dramatic scenes, the thing that was probably most important is the extent to which the person who was caring for the person with dementia was able to give themselves space as they related to the person who they were caring for. And if you increased the external pressure, then very quickly the scene would go south.
The actors were as much as they could. They were trying to imagine the feeling or feeling what was happening. So obviously, how they were feeling in the way that we were, developing the scene or scenario, helped force a reaction in a certain direction. So, like you say, the improvisation itself wasn't sort of just let's just talk differently, or let's just say something. It was actually felt very much by the actors, and that's how they could know how it might work. And it was discussed quite a lot in the rehearsals, wasn't it? So things, I might feel like this, or I might feel like that, or this is how people would respond. How did you feel about the audience reactions at the time? I mean, how did you, obviously during the live performances, how did you feel how they went?
I was very pleased with how audiences responded. They seem to be very engaged with it, and they seem to be they seem to have a lot to say, which is a good sign, I think. I mean, it's a pity in a way that it was during COVID, because I couldn't actually get people to come up and take part in the scenes, which is because I wasn't allowed to do that, and it's a shame I wasn't able to do that. But apart from that, which is a slight regret, which is just to do with the time that we were doing it, I thought it was people were very engaged. Their responses were very intuitive, and there was a big variety of different responses as well, actually.
And we made the decision to, in fact, it was your push really to get the college students involved. They absolutely were straight away listening. No one was really fidgeting or looking at their phone or anything like that. I noticed, and they were all very much engaged and keen to respond, weren't they? People were actually quite happy to speak up.
They were. Well, I think there's something not that healthy about separating things which are to do with older people from young people. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is that actually a lot of young people are touched by dementia in some way or another, because so many people know somebody who's got it, who's close to them. So actually, I think it was very good evidence that is the case, and that young people actually want to engage on the subject, which is quite an optimistic thing to find, I think.
And it's interesting that I imagine if you just ask somebody on the street, about understanding about dementia, they might say it happens to older people. And there was a comment that somebody made in one of our responses, actually, and some of the feedback was, well, you don't know it's going to happen until it happens, and then this big thing happens. But actually, it happens earlier for a lot of people. So the young people, it was happening for them through their experiences at a young age, and a lot of them could relate. So it isn't necessarily something that happens much, much later in life. It does affect us all. I
agree, and I think that there's a sort of that understanding is something to be encouraged, really, and that the more public it is and the more the conversation is engaged with, the better, actually.
That's a very nice point to end on.
See you soon.
Bye.
Food for thought in there, perhaps, a little bit of insight as well, which I thought might be interesting. So we're going to move straight on. I'm going to have a little chat with Julia now. All right then, Julia, are you ready?
Yeah.
For your so just to start with, Julia, can you just introduce yourself or just say who you are?
Yeah, well, I'm Julia, of course, and I've been involved with dementia for quite some time through my mother. I was a carer for my mother. This was quite a long time ago. I was totally ignorant about it, and one of the things I learnt was that I don't know much about it. So after she died, a while after, actually, I needed a sort of settling point. I became involved with the Alzheimer's Society initially, being a lead volunteer in a memory cafe locally. I live in Torquay. And then at that same time, joining the research network through which all this wonderful research has happened. And I have been a member of the Always group since 2014. In fact, I was the person who invented the word always, but I always need to be reminded of it. I never get the first, I've written it down now, yes, for what it means. And I think that word action is really important, because I'm somebody who just wants action to understand about dementia, to get everyone else to understand about dementia, to make life with dementia better. My background is in education, drama, English, and then media studies, all of which are about communication. And the drama I did was not school plays. Well, I had to do those, actually. But the main thing was improvised drama, which is why I was very interested in being involved in the steering committee of this project.
So in terms of that, then, in terms of the steering group, you were involved right from the beginning, weren't you? And we got you on and asked your advice. So what was your sort of what did you want the play to achieve?
I wanted the play to communicate just what Paul said, which is like tipping points. And I wanted the play to be genuine. I wanted the scenes to be genuine and to be almost to start from what people with dementia thought, felt, and how they tried to express themselves. And yes, and so in the scenario, we discussed the scenarios as the steering committee. And then when the Always group got involved, that was even more focused on what people with dementia actually thought and what they said. but yeah, and I was also involved in the casting, in the auditions. That was fascinating.
Can you, let's hear about that.
Me and Paul in Exeter with a woman from a casting agency, can't remember what it was, and a number of actors coming in to audition for the parts, all of whom were about 50. I'm not good at ages, except for the woman who got the part in the end. And I was really pleased about that, because not only was she the best, but she also she was of an age when, I know not everybody's old when they have dementia, but she was of the older generation. And what was interesting there, that meant all the scenarios had to change, because you couldn't have a married couple or anything. So it had to be, it shows the flexibility of the improvised situation. But yeah, that was interesting. And then I was involved in the Always group when the members of the Always group, particularly those with dementia, were able to really focus, really help the actors. It was really good. There was a bit on your first screen that showed the actors listening in a room in Exeter to the rest of us, all in our little rooms, and putting in their stories and helping the actors understand more about people with dementia. And I think, as Paul said, this helped them form their actual characters, informed by that.
In terms of the casting, Paul mentioned some transcripts which were redacted, anonymized transcripts that were used very early on in his thinking. But some excerpts were used in the casting process as well. Can you tell me how you chose, why you thought what the people that were good actors, what happened with the transcripts and what they were doing?
Well, it was really interesting, because I think they'd been sent the transcript before, obviously, but told not to invent a character. So it was a bit of a puzzle for them, really. And what Paul told them right at the beginning of each audition was to read it, looking at the punctuation, not try to put their own actorly, or maybe it wasn't actorly, but not to put their own interpretation on it. And that was very, very difficult for a lot of them, because, of course, the accounts that had been made into monologues, really, the accounts were they were the way people with dementia can speak, with pauses, with diversions, with saying something again, maybe a little bit differently. And so this was the task they had to do, rather than put a character onto it. And this is what led to the people who successfully got the parts. They were able to actually do that. They also had to do a little improv about boiling an egg, which was interesting to see as well. So they had to do a little bit of moving in that way. But yes, it was genuinely, it just showed that communication by people with dementia is not the same as it doesn't follow a narrative as straightforwardly, and it doesn't follow one sentence, another sentence, and the following sentence.
Yeah. So the actors were chosen because they could do that, and I think that was very important. I think the actors did a good job, but it did help to have some insight into speech patterns and that sort of thing, which is really lucky that we could do that with them. So that was great. So you were talking about the Always group. So can you just let everybody know about how we involved the Always group and where the Always group came in?
Yes, well, the Always group has been involved since the start of Ideal, and all the work streams that have happened from there. But this particular one, they were told about it before it happened, so they knew something about it. And I can't remember how many meetings there were, but there were quite a few meetings with Paul before he'd actually started to have the cast, and then with the cast themselves, which actually kept that reality, kept that experience of people with dementia, and probably the way people with dementia and speak. I mean, it just kept the reality there into what was actually a creative situation. And there were some really interesting comments, because people told their stories. They added stuff to the scenarios which might not have been used, but they helped deepen and make far more realistic and genuine what happened. And looking at it afterwards, thinking about what the actors said afterwards, they actually came to a personal understanding of what life with dementia was like, rather than
absolutely. And that was one of the things we wanted to do with the film, was to record how what their journey was like in regards to how they developed characters and things like that. So so that was great. You actually came to the play, didn't you? You actually attended. So can you tell me about, I mean, I was quite nervous because I saw you in the audience and I was thinking, oh my goodness, Julia's there. We obviously, this is our, potentially biggest critic, because you've been involved from the beginning. And so I was interested to know what your feelings were about.
Well, first of all, it was very exciting. It was the first time I've been out at night.
Oh yeah, it was COVID, wasn't it? Yeah, it was just.
I was with my friend who was also an ex-colleague who was a drama and theatre studies teacher. So we were actually interested both together in forum theatre. I knew about it, of course, through Paul, but I hadn't seen it. So I was hugely impressed at how well it worked. It was absolutely, I mean, the acting, the way it was done was marvelous anyway. It worked. The whole audience became involved in watching and listening, and the audience also, because this was an audience, I suppose a general audience, but people interested in dementia. Some people had maybe family members dementia, other people were working, or social workers, or people who knew about it, and so really had something to contribute, and they did contribute, some quite critically actually, about some of the ideas that were said, but they contributed and made suggestions, and together that audience, Paul got the questions from the audience, and the audience, you were going around with a microphone, weren't you?
Yeah. I was running around, yeah. You
were running around, and so all these masked people, which made it pretty difficult, I think, gave their ideas, and then the scenes were done again, and it really seemed mutual. It was a marvelous experience, actually. I thought that was very, very effective. It would have been nice if people could have jumped up and
it's a shame.
That would have taken all night, I should think. Anyway,
it might have done. Yeah, that was a shame. So you were also involved. So we had the Always group involved in the edit for the film as well. And that was really important, because actually we did change quite a bit in the editing. Thanks. No, but it was important. We had the input from the Always group. I think it really did improve things. But I was interested to know what you thought about the play, and then what we've got as a product as the film, because obviously it does show different things. It shows more, doesn't it? It shows the different audiences as well, of course, and the rehearsals.
Yes, I think well, I would say this anyway, but I think the film is really, really good, because it does what we all wanted it to do, which is to communicate to a wider audience about communication situations between people with people with the condition and people who are trying to deal and help with that condition. I was particularly interested, because I wasn't there, of course, with the drama people, who, first of all, I think when Paul was
the college students,
people, who, first of all, they had a drama head on, and they were talking with a famous director, and so they were thinking in terms of staging. And as it went on, they became more and more involved in the condition themselves, started taking it personally, thinking it personally, and that was a really good example, as he said, of youth and dementia. I mean, they're going to take that experience back. I also liked the fact that in the film, there were some members of the Always group were in it, because it gave it a bit more linear, sense, which for the Joe public, it's easier to follow. Especially
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So moving on a little bit. So in terms of your sort of seeing it all the way through from the very beginning to the very end, and then the film, of course, and everything, what do you think were the sort of, for you, what were the sort of the key messages to draw out of the whole experience? So from a personal point of view, but also from a general point of view, perhaps.
Well, I think the personal and the general point of view are actually to me, they're sort of the same. It's about the importance of emotion. It's the fact that you're not just you're not just asking somebody, you're not just dealing with whether somebody should drive or not. You're not just dealing with a question of perhaps somebody going into a home or trying to get them to the day centre when you're doing something else. The emotion is there, and I'm sort of speaking as a person, as an ex-carer now, and somebody who's still has plenty of interaction with people with dementia. And that emotion is so important. This is the message. It's so important to recognize that it's there and to manage it in an appropriate way, because one of the things that probably everybody listening knows this, but one of the things that people with dementia don't lose is their emotional sensitivity and sensibility. And so they can read and feel how you feel. And so it's particularly important, and that's what what this experience has done for me, and I think for everyone, for all involved. One has to recognize the role of emotion and to manage it by giving more space, giving more time, or taking time out. That might be difficult, but or somehow making it supportive without being upsetting, because there are a better result. It's going to go better in the end if you can do that, and it's hard.
And it might be harder to do in real life, or having to think of these things, but raising these ideas, I think, to people have said in their feedback that it either made them think, or it made them emotional, or it made them think, okay, maybe I could try and do things differently, which is obviously what we sort of hoped. Thanks, Julia. That was really great. So we're just going to move on to the questions then, I think. But just before we do that, because I think this is sort of relevant, we had some feedback just this morning come in actually, and this was to do with somebody's sort of what they took away from the film, and it sort of chimes with what you said, Julia. And they talked about the scenarios illustrating active listening and focusing on the person you are talking to rather than your own feelings and frustration. So that's sort of really what you were saying there. And also that the person with dementia isn't trying to be awkward, it is how they are frustrated, or it is difficult for them. And so patience is important, isn't it? So that's just one of the things that we can take away. So
somebody did ask how they could see the film, and I have put the link in, but I will also make sure that we tweet that again, and we can email it out if you would like. But it is freely available on YouTube, and we really encourage people to watch and share, because the point of making it free and accessible is so that it can get out there. But while everybody else is brewing up their questions, I will just put to Claire and Julia. So Angela in the chat was asking about whether any of the actors live with dementia themselves, and were people living with dementia involved in the casting. And I'd sort of done a bit of a typed response, but I thought you might want to respond to that yourselves.
Well, I remember that I really wanted that to happen as well, and so did Claire. We were really keen on that, and some feelers were put out, and there were some possibilities, but of course we had COVID, and so traveling and the idea of looking after how are we going to deal with anybody who might have been coming from the North or the Midlands to possibly audition? How will we deal with it? So in the end, it was sad, but in the end, it sort of had to be practical.
Yeah. So we did have some people who were interested in being involved, and because they, like you say, because they lived out of Exeter, we needed the actors to be in Exeter to do all the rehearsals. So we had rehearsals over a week, and it was every day for a week, and then we had another week where we did some more. So they really needed to be able to go to all the rehearsals and do all the rehearsals. So we would have had to put them up with accommodation, and then there were issues with that. Anyway, so we would have done if we could, but I hope that we gave the actors enough information and guidance and all of that they could do a realistic job, which was my key thing, and Paul, to try and make sure that the actors really could portray well enough so that the audience would then respond in a way which was interesting.
And it also raised an interesting question of, if you were a professional actor and you found out that you had a diagnosis of dementia, at what point might you share that with your agent? Because of course all of this went through a casting agency and all the rest of it, and so there was a wonder that maybe there are people out there, but they're not at that point in their dementia journey where they're willing to make that leap, and that was an interesting thing for us to consider. So I would point that out. But just, I wonder if I could ask you two to comment on the involvement of people with lived experience of dementia right back before you even get to the play, in the sort of choosing of the scenarios, if you'd like to tell us about that.
Well, we had our steering group, and all of the people in the steering group either had direct experience of living with people with dementia or working with people with dementia, or people had their own personal experiences. So we brought those in, and Paul had he talked to various people, including people in the Always group, whilst developing the scenarios himself. One of the key things he was trying to do was to gain some kind of narrative which was fairly typical and fairly common, which were the key scenarios, like the driving scene was obviously something that people were this was something that was happening to people. The idea of moving into care and all of that, all those things that come into that, was obviously something that was a very common theme. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Julia, about that.
Well, just to say that in the early stages of the steering group, we were all asked to put in ideas for scenarios, and lots of us did. I mean, I put in some, but in the end, it had to be ones that are sort of limited number and commonly shared ones. But they were all about genuine communication. So they had to have a tipping point, or did turning what Paul said, a tipping point, rather than just something that happened. They had to have that dramatic bit in there.
That's right. And they were like, basically all of the scenarios that we played out were many elements of many people's experiences. So it wasn't it wasn't like our research pointed to, oh, this is what's happening in this particular thing. It was more little nuances of how the actors played them out, and the characters themselves were fictional, of course. So yeah, we drew on a lot of information in order to decide which stories. And obviously Paul wanted to make them dramatic and interesting and about communication, so he had his own artistic input in choosing which ones were working.
But of course, what's marvelous is the involvement throughout of people with that real life experience of dementia. And so even with the film, you watched the film, you commented and helped us do the edits, but actually the film ends with footage of you, Julia, and Keith, who lives with dementia, commenting on what they have thought as a result of watching the film. So it's really sort of from start to finish, it was with you.
The actors also did have access, and I pointed various parts of the toolkit to them. So we mentioned the toolkit earlier, so there are lots of videos in there with people with dementia talking about various things and illuminating on various aspects of living well, and their stories, or their ways of speaking and their ways of thinking were also incorporated into how the actors then sort of approach the rehearsals. So I think that probably had quite an impact on, like I say, how the actors were thinking.
I'm just thinking about the actors with dementia. I mean, as an educator and creative person, I think there should be an opportunity for actors with dementia, or people with dementia who aren't actors, to do something creative like drama. And so I hope there's somebody out there who might be able to think about that.
The issue of using arts in sort of putting across messages or engaging people is something that we do, and we've had other various projects. We have a opera coming your way, and that's an exciting thing. It's I don't know, Kathy might want to say a bit more about that, but we've done other work which is there's also a photography element to that. And like you say, it's about it was about raising awareness, but it's also about inviting people to get involved in interesting artistic things, because that's for anybody, that's stimulating and enjoyable, and another way of communicating, isn't it, really? But just thinking about the actual play, one of the reasons we wanted Willie Gilder to get involved in the artwork was for that reason as well. I mean, he has dementia, and it's also to showcase that people with dementia can do great stuff and great art and lots of interesting things, but also that we've discussed that piece of art with some students, and it helps them think about what it's trying to say. And so I think art is very important in a way of communicating messages, but also engagement. So absolutely, that it's important. In terms of impact, it's hard to measure, but we do hope that people do go away and then their attitudes are changed slightly, or they might approach things slightly differently. But like I say, capturing that isn't that easy to do.
Yeah, I mean, so just on Willie Gilder is well worth following on Twitter. He is prolific, and he tweets his artworks. He's very good at sort of sketching where he is and what he sees, but he's also taught art via Zoom to other people living with dementia. So he's very much in that kind of bracket of bringing the joy. Frances Isaacs is another lady who lives with dementia who teaches art to other people with dementia. And the way they talk about how it's changed their lives, I mean, it's transformative. And as you say, it's about bringing the joy. And just on that particular phrase, one thing I would say that I remember Julia and the Always group pointing out to Paul was that they wanted there to be laughter in there as well. You know, this play couldn't just be struggle, challenge, and then how do you overcome those challenges? Because actually there's a lot of fun and nuance involved in those everyday situations. But I think when you see the film, you will notice that it is quite focused on that sort of every day. And so Charles has asked a question in the chat, building on what you've said, Susan, about what is it about the power of theatre that makes a difference here? And there is something about merely staging a conversation that you might have, you know, in your kitchen, in your living room, and it's perfectly normal, but somehow seeing that played out in front of you and you are not a part of it, and so you have that detachment and you can have that space to think, really does make you think. And you suddenly go, oh gosh, you know, I can't do that. And, you know, I know I've said things like that, but I mustn't, because clearly the reaction, you know, can go this way. And yes, we do. Our next project is an opera in North Wales. So we continue to attempt arts-based interventions, shall we say?
Just touching on the aspect of theatre and why that's helpful. In this case, because we use the forum theatre idea, which is to get the audience to sort of talk to us and to say what they were feeling and thinking during the scenes and how could we make the scenes go better. You know, we did have the happier side of the scene and the not so good side of the scene. So those were played out. But because the audience were there saying, oh, you know, this is what they need to do, or this is what they need to do to improve it. That did make the audience very much part of what happened. So the audience weren't passive. They were very much part of the play, and then the film itself, we made sure that the audience members' comments are very much in the film as well. So it's very, you know, it's not just like a passive play to watch.
So I'm going to give Julia the final word, because I know we're pushing against it with time. But Julia, go on.
I was just going to say, actually, that in terms of people with dementia being a part of drama, but also when we were on the steering committee, when we were planning it in 2020, we wanted, and I sort of thought it was going to happen and then it couldn't, we wanted people with dementia and carers to be in the audience and to have the opportunity of coming up there and saying something. But maybe we should do something like that again, or somebody should, because that would be great. I just had this vision that somebody would say no, and that's wrong, and come up and show them how to do it. And that could happen, but it didn't happen on this one because of COVID
rules, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
The unfortunate COVID, but we got there. Omicron nearly derailed the performances entirely. So
yeah, absolutely.
Glad for what we managed. So it just remains to say thank you so much for being with us this morning. The recording will go up in our YouTube channel in time, but give me a chance. Just to make you aware, if you're not already, that our next webinar in this series is on the 28th of November, and we'd love to see you there. But in the meantime, we are always open to questions and comments, and, you know, point me to the next thing. Always please feel free to reach out to us on email at ideal@exeter.ac.uk, and we're also on Twitter. So it just remains to wish you a very happy Monday, and may it not be raining where you are.
Thank you very much, everyone. Really good to see you all.